we say hi. While we're getting ready, I just want to mention a couple of upcoming events. There are a lot of upcoming NAASR events that will be taking place over the next several months, now through the end of the year. In-person events here, in-person events elsewhere, online events, hybrid events, underwater events. But the next event that will be taking place will be next Wednesday, September 20th at 7:30 p.m. It's a webinar. Dr. Bedros Dermatosian in conversation with Mark A. Mamagonian. The webinar is entitled Denial of Genocides in the 21st Century and will be an overview of the new book of the same name edited by Dermatosian. It will be online via Zoom or YouTube and is presented by the NAASR Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation series on contemporary Armenian issues and the Society for Armenian Studies. On Monday, September 25th, an in-person event at Columbia University, Hans Lucas Kieser, Seyhan Bayraktar, and Khachik Muradian, co-editors of the new book After the Ottomans, Genocide's Long Shadow and Armenian Resistance at Columbia University. The following day, Tuesday, September 26th, here in this room at NAASR, two of the editors, Seyhan Bayraktar and Khachik Muradian, will be in conversation with another volume contributor, Nanor Barsumian, here again at NAASR, After the Ottomans, Genocide's Long Shadow and Armenian Resilience. Please visit the NAASR website, naasr.org, often. Get on the NAASR email list, follow our activities on social media for news about the many, many other NAASR programs and other work that we are doing upcoming. Okay. Tonight's program takes place also under the auspices of the NAASR Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation series on contemporary Armenian issues, and we thank, as always, the Gulbenkian Foundation for their continuing support of our programs on contemporary events and issues. I would like to encourage those of you attending tonight in person or watching online to send us your feedback on this event. Hopefully overwhelmingly positive, but regardless, we would like to hear from you. You can email us at hq@naasr.org. We value your opinions. For those of you in the room tonight, we're going to do a little experiment, and during the Q&A portion, you are encouraged to get up and use the microphone there so that people who are watching online will be able to hear the questions from the audience. What the microphone is not, on the other hand, is an open invitation to give a long lecture of some kind, and if that sort of thing happens, we will have to have our hired goons come in and remove you. No, I'm sure it won't be a problem. So our speaker tonight, Gerard Libaridian, is in that dangerous zone that is summed up in the phrase, "He needs no introduction," which generally means something like the opposite of what it actually says. Gerard Libaridian has been a prominent figure in Armenian intellectual and political circles for, if I can say this, Gerard, more than half a century. He has served as editor of Asbarez newspaper and of the Armenian Review. He was a co-founder of the Zorian Institute. He holds a doctorate in history from UCLA and taught at USC, Rutgers, UPenn, UMass, Tufts, and other universities before a career detour of sorts into the government of the Republic of Armenia in the early 1990s, where he served, among other capacities, as advisor to the president, first deputy minister of foreign affairs, and senior advisor to the president for foreign and security policies, before returning to academia as the Alex Manukyan Chair in Modern Armenian History at the University of Michigan. He is the author of numerous books, including Armenia at the Crossroads, Democracy and Nationhood in the Post-Soviet Era, 1991, The Challenge of Statehood, Armenian Political Thinking Since Independence, 1999, and Modern Armenia, People, Nation, State, 2007, as well as several recent volumes in Armenian and the newly published A Precarious Armenia, The Third Republic, the Karabakh Conflict, and Genocide Politics, published this year by the Gomidas Institute. Copies of the book are available for purchase tonight in person or online, and for tonight only, these and the other English language books of Professor Libaridian are 20% off for all customers. I don't know if he comes up with the titles for all of his books, but I must say that Armenia at the Crossroads, The Challenge of Statehood, and A Precarious Armenia are all titles which, although the books themselves span more than 30 years, are as applicable to the present moment as any titles you can think of. I would encourage you to get a copy of the new volume. There is much packed into its nearly 600 pages, much to make you think, much to make you angry, things you will agree with, and things you will not agree with. So please give him a warm welcome, Gerard Libaridian.
Thank you, Mark, and Laura, and everyone else who has helped bring this evening about. I also want to thank the Gulbenkian Foundation, which is also the main sponsor of the series of 5 volumes that I've been working on. This is the 3rd volume. The first 2 were in Armenian and published in Armenia. Hayastan, Turkey, Armenia, Turkey. The 2nd volume was the Yerort Hanrabedutyun, Karabakh Hagamardutyun, the Third Republic and Conflict of Karabakh. So this is the first in English, and then hopefully by the end of the year or in January, we'll have 2 more volumes, one in Armenian, one in English, more historical articles, more scientific articles. I thank you for coming because it takes a little bit of courage to come and listen to me. I know, as Mark said, I know that a lot of people disagree with me, and obviously I disagree with a lot of people. I do not question anyone's patriotism, even if they don't have nice things to say about me. But there's also a problem of people expecting some hope in my talks, because by and large, I may be the most depressing writer around. And I remember in 2005, I believe at the Armenian Cultural Foundation, I gave a lecture and I kind of projected what will happen if we continue in Armenia the policies, the framework of policies that we are following. And I can say that I more or less said there will be a big war and we will lose. And I've said that since then. And at the end, there were questions. And finally, one gentleman got up and said, "This is so depressing." And my answer was, "Sir, did I promise to be an entertainer?" I don't remember promising to be an entertainer. For that, you go to Johnny Carson. You know, at that time, it was Johnny Carson. Now, the volume, as Mark said, it's about 600 pages. It has 44 pieces in it, ranging from 1978 to the present. It has articles and interviews collected, half of them previously published, sometimes in obscure places, and the other half being new pieces that have not been published before. And the book has 5 parts. The first is on the Third Republic, 13 pieces covering foreign and security policy, the problem of immigration, and particularly the issue of the conflict between the concepts of nation and state. Azk Yevbedutyun. The nation does not have boundaries, particularly in our case. It is everywhere. Wherever there are 3 Armenians and 2 churches, then we have, the nation is there. A state has boundaries. And this has a lot of implications on what are the issues to be resolved for each concept. A nation has the problem of securing the welfare, security, defense of borders and people. And a nation that has no boundaries, the nation which has no boundaries, has other issues to resolve because you are somewhere else and fundamental problems in your life are taken care of by a government other than Armenia. So this issue is very, very important in terms of understanding even some of the apparent conflicts between the diaspora and Armenia over the last 30 years. The second part is the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. And the first piece is something some of you may have remembered if you were members of the Zorian Institute, when in 1988 we went with the Sister City program to Yerevan, and the movement had started, and I came back and wrote a 30-page report, which was not printed, but it was distributed to the members. I put that in there because it's interesting to compare, right? What you say 40 years ago, 30 years ago, and what you say now. But other than that, it has an account of my visit to Baku in 2013 to participate in a panel where I criticized the Azerbaijani government, as well as the Armenian position. But it is an exchange that is very important. There's also another piece that is not published, but it's a long piece that is how to think and not to think about the Karabakh problem, which was supposed to be published in September, at the end of September 2020, when the war started, and I didn't publish it. But it's interesting because it summarizes all the arguments in favor of the policies that were followed and policies that were not followed, that might have been followed. But I have also added a chapter that is kind of risky, and it is, I don't know how people will accept it, but it's a critique of the leadership of Nagorno-Karabakh for 30 years. The fact is that we have always blamed Armenian government policies and leaders, when in fact it's the Karabakh leadership that had said no to any compromise. And that is very important if we want to deal. Karabakh has been looked upon like the paradise, the ideal Armenian environment, and Armenia is a bad place. But the fact is that a lot of the problems come from the non-compromising positions of either sometimes Armenia's leaders, but often more often the leaders of Karabakh. Then there's a section that will also be disconcerting to some, and is what is Turkey in our political thinking? It represents the core part of Armenian diasporan thinking, and to some extent Armenian thinking. That is, it revolves around that, and I'll explain this later, and the politics of genocide recognition. I'm not talking the fact of genocide that we know that's settled, but the question of going after the recognition of the genocide. What does it give us? What does it cost us? What does it mean? When is it that governments recognize and others don't? And what do governments get from us when they recognize the genocide? Often we decide that such and such government is friendly to Armenian interests if they recognize the genocide. On the other hand, many recognize the genocide and have taken many positions that did not jive with Armenian interests. Now, in that section, there's also two pieces. One is an answer I gave to then Foreign Minister of Turkey, Davutoğlu, who became Prime Minister later, and he had a fallout with Erdogan and left government. He's in opposition now. Davutoğlu had written a piece in the Turkish Policy Quarterly, where he argued for honorable justice, fair justice, justice for all. That is, yeah, Turks killed Armenians, Armenians killed Turks, so we should all, like, equalizing. And I wrote an answer which was then published on online Turkish Policy Quarterly. But also, there's an important article also published in Turkish Policy Quarterly, of which I'm a board member, advisory board member, where they published my piece, a critique of Erdogan's attitude toward genocide, the Armenian genocide, and pointing out that where has Erdogan called some event as genocide, and why he cannot apply the same things, the same criteria to the Armenian case, but also weighing in the factor of his Islamist political personality. That is, I have made an argument, I'm not sure it is 100% correct. The argument is that the genocide and massacres did not come from Islam. They came from Turkish nationalism. And this is a very important distinction. And in the case of Erdogan, because of his Islamist background, he was more likely to come close to recognizing the genocide. And in fact, he was the first prime minister who made a declaration on April 24th, mild, saying that, you know, we sympathize with our Armenian citizens for their losses, etc. So, and then there's the section on things I wrote that preceded the war, 2020 war, and the warnings the warnings to the government, which I then expressed personally as well, regarding what was coming. And then finally, after the war, did we learn anything? Now, three major issues that can summarize the themes that I have covered in this book. One is, it is, excuse me, extremely important to make a distinction on the categories of causes for the genocide. Why genocide? And there are two main lines. One is that genocide occurred because Turks are genocidal. Simply put, that they are brutes, they are brutal people, they're not civilized, and that's why they committed genocide. The other explanation, and now different explanations, but explanations that are political, historical. Was it a political issue? Were Armenians a political problem which they resolved by massacring and deporting Armenians, which makes it a very rational political act. And I would say a successful one. That is, did they secure their territory for it? Did they secure a kind of government that did not have to deal with the democratic parliamentarian quasi-socialist programs of the Hınçagyans and Taşnakçı? But the difference between these two is very relevant to what we do now and how we project the future. That is, if we think Turks are genocidal, and by extension Azerbaijanis, then there is no way we will deal with them. We cannot deal with them. We cannot, essentially, they are genocidal. So, therefore, you feel the threat today is Turkey's genocidal instincts, and therefore your security in the future lies somewhere other than dealing with them. But if you think the genocide had political, historical, was the result of political historical circumstances, then you have to see if those circumstances are the same or not, and accordingly weigh the degree of threat from Turkey or Azerbaijan and the kind of threat. So this is a fundamental theme in the book. The second is, how do we relate to the world? How do we write our history through which we relate to the world? And here we have a very serious issue, and the issue is that we tend to think of ourselves compared to the world as victims. And then if you are a victim, you have no responsibility in what happens to you. It is Turkey and others who want to massacre you. And all you can do is ask others for help. If this is the nexus of Armenian political thinking in terms of how we relate, then it's a kind of a relationship where we're not agents of our own history. We have nowhere to contribute, that nothing we have done or said could be a problem. But we are victims because we're Christians, we are victims. And just this started from the modern phase of this looking for the savior, starts in San Stefano, February 1878, when the Russians defeated the Ottomans. And the Russians suggested to the Patriarch in Istanbul, Varjabedian, to ask the general, who was the victorious general, to include a paragraph on Armenian reforms imposed from the outside for the Armenian provinces. And it starts there, and it continues till today under various titles, including Haytat. Yesterday, I don't know if you guys know Ardak Beglarian. You must know if you follow events in Karabakh. He was state minister for a while. He has been advisor to the state ministers, even the new one. And he said, he made a statement that the world has abandoned Karabakh because they're not doing anything to help Karabakh. What does this assume? It assumes that the world owes Karabakh something, or Armenians something. Has the world promised anything to Karabakh? Have they told Karabakh, we will save you, we will give you independence, we will provide for your security? I do not know of such promises. But it assumes that they have. So what this means is that when we talk to the world, we're talking to ourselves. We project roles, we assign roles to governments which they've never asked for, they've never promised to fulfill. I'm not saying there's no responsibility for international community. What I'm saying is that they don't owe anything, and they have not promised anything. The world is not a moral place. International law doesn't matter for small nations. It is created by the big ones for the benefit of big ones. It applies when the big ones want it. It's not relevant when the big ones don't want it. So we go into a moral world. Our grievances become dominant. Demand for justice becomes dominant. And justice, historical justice and political justice. But then it's not a realistic view of the world. In fact, the international community, beginning with the United Nations Security Council, including the Minsk Group and the OSCE, including our friends Russia, Iran, Greece, Cyprus, all those, France, they've all told us Karabakh will not be independent. we will not recognize independence, and you are part of Azerbaijan. This is the message from the international community. But we didn't listen to these. We listened to ourselves. And I find this also relevant when we talk in our negotiations with Azerbaijan and Turkey. We often, and this is one of the weaknesses of our diplomacy, because we're not diplomats, we don't do diplomacy, we do lobbying with other countries. And there's a difference between lobbying and diplomacy. That is, we project interests, character, motivations to Azerbaijan, and then when we are arguing the point between us, we are arguing with ourselves, our image of what Azerbaijan is. Our negotiators often have that with Turkey. It is our projected image with which we are fighting and negotiating. Now, the third point I want to make, we always talk about the lessons of history. We have a great history, and we should do. In Yerevan, some 10 years ago, I did an experiment in an open forum project that I did maybe 15 years ago. And my first lecture was about what do we mean when we say lessons of history. And that evening, before going to my lecture, I went to a store, bought 7 newspapers, different political parties, and I bet that each one of them had at least one article that started with, ended with, or mentioned the history teaches us the following. And the same facts teach different people, different political parties, different leaders, different intellectuals, completely different and sometimes opposite lessons. So, a lesson of history is what you need for an argument today, more often than not. And this is the fundamental issue I deal with. What is the relationship between history, the present, and the future? And if we don't know, first of all, which history is it that we look at? Whose history? Who writes history? Do we really have a history, let's say, of the Armenian political parties? Absolutely most histories are written by party members or are paid by the party to someone to write that history. So we don't know. For example, until now, after 50 years, as Mark said, I'm still struggling whether the Armenian revolutionary parties, Sanchagyans and Stashnaks, did the right thing. Sometimes I think they had no choice. Sometimes I think it was a big mistake. But we do not have an analytical history of the political parties, assessing it under the contours of all the contexts that existed at the time. It's really a problem if we don't have a good history. I'd say the same thing about the church history. We don't have a good history of the church. We have, the best is Azka Badum by Ormanian, which is a masterpiece, but it is not a openly analytical one. It is not studied within the context of what were the impact of the policies of the church, of the values maintained by the church. What is the impact of the church on Armenian political thinking? So I would say that often we act like the moviegoer who doesn't like the ending of the movie. The hero dies. So the next day he goes again, hoping that the end will change. And it doesn't change. But we keep going to the same movie, expecting that the end will change. There's no way the end will change if we continue doing the same thing. And we've had enough experience in the last 30 years. One final comment. Our political culture and thinking and this constant looking for salvation from the outside world, and by outside world we mean Christian world. We've never thought about Iran as a salvation, source of salvation, right? Because we think our strength comes from our being Christian and looking for Christians, Christian countries. This is, of course, beginning from the Crusades, right? I mean, it's nothing new. The result has been that part of our political thinking has the concept at its roots that Armenia is an implant in that region, and therefore it must be protected by enemies it is surrounded with, rather than thinking we were there, we've been there before others, and we're still there, although very small, and the only way we will resolve our problems if we can resolve our problems with our neighbors. No one is going to come to help us. And you can see what is happening in Karabakh. Can you imagine 5 members of the UN Security Council, 4 of which Russia, France, US, UK, every day they say we are concerned about the siege of Karabakh, but they can't even get to a resolution, just a resolution, to say Azerbaijan should open. What did we expect? They have projected their conflicts into the region, and they are part of the problem. They cannot be part of the solution. And that is proven by the fact that the Minsk group that functioned from 1992 March, well, formally until the Ukraine war, I think, never achieved a thing. Never. The only thing that happened during the OSCE mediation is the ceasefire of '94. And that, the first part of that ceasefire was achieved by Kazimierov, the Russian ambassador, and the second part was done directly between Armenia and Azerbaijan. That made that permanent until the 2020 war. But the Minsk group seemed to be the only forum where Russia and the West were functioning in peace. But I have to tell you a secret. They functioned in peace because no one wanted to carry the responsibility of resolving it. Okay? Russia was unwilling to put pressure on Armenia, except here and there. The West was not prepared to put pressure on Azerbaijan because they thought if Armenia is pressured by Russia, Armenia will go to the West. And if the West pressures Azerbaijan, they will go to Russia. Remember the Dayton Accords? How the United States brought the sides, the Serbs and the others, and told them, you don't leave this room until you agree and you sign. Nothing like that was ever done. There was no real pressure on the sides because each one was playing the same game, and they were playing the game while looking harmonious. I'll stop here. Oh, one thing. I've been asked that sometimes after this depressing talk, is there any sign of hope? And my answer is, we can't continue thinking and doing things the same way, which led us to these disasters, and still expect hope. Hope comes when we start thinking analytically, systematically, and realistically, pragmatically. Then there may be something. I don't know how, you know how much we've lost in the last 4 years. I don't know if we can recover any of it. But at least we shouldn't lose more, because there isn't much left to lose. Thank you very much.
Q&A, we have some Zoom questions coming in, and I will pick through those. And for those of you in the room, as I said at the beginning, please, if you are able to, get up, use the microphone. If you wish to identify yourself, identify yourself. If you don't wish to identify yourself, don't. But please be short and to the point, and then go back. While you're thinking, Gerard, question I have is, you have, I guess as my introduction indicated, you have had at least 2 careers, one in government and one in academia. How do you harmonize those or balance them in your thinking? Are they essentially the same, completely different? How has each shaped the way you approach these questions? I guess that's a bunch of questions all rolled up into one.
Well, I'll give a short answer, because a long answer will be in my next book. There's a whole chapter from historian to diplomat and back to historian. How did each one affect the other? And the short answer is that from the beginning, I never knew what I was going to do in my life. I loved history, I loved politics, I loved philosophy and literature, but I had no idea as to what position I would have. So when I came to the States and finished college in history, I thought history was a fundamental kind of field. I thought I know nothing. There's so much else to know. So I ended up with a PhD. I didn't know what I would do with the PhD. And my relatives would ask me, what do you do with a PhD in history? I had no idea. But there was something that was firm in my mind. I had questions as to what happened in our history and why. Why does a nation that starts with the Ardashes, let's say, with definite boundaries, and 10th century, we still have at least, in Armenia, with at least 1 million people, a city like Ani with 100,000 people, which no European city had? How do we go from there? Is it sufficient that we explain it by external factors? They came, conquered, massacred, etc. That has never satisfied me. And I've gotten more and more into how do we make decisions? So, let's say, life has been that about a decade, I do academic work. I try to answer questions, and I come to some conclusions. The next decade, I become politically active, or in this case, government work. And then another decade, I go back, and it is a very dynamic relationship between these two. That is, I could not have done what I did as a diplomat if I had not known the history I knew and the questions I had asked. I can give you one example. The 1994 May ceasefire that was arranged by Ambassador Kazimierov, extremely capable fellow, was seen as a temporary ceasefire. We took it as temporary, as a timeout, just to rearm ourselves, and Azerbaijan did so. Our interest was to end the war, and not just a ceasefire of 30 days or what seemed to be 30 days. And there were two issues that were obstacles. One was that Azerbaijan, that had imported 200 to 300 mujahids from Afghanistan to fight us, had signed a contract, initial contract with the advisor of Gulbenkian Hekmatyar, the then Prime Minister of Afghanistan, and initially 1,500 mujahids were coming for the next round of the fighting. And the second issue was to find the right language to convince Azerbaijan to do it. But Azerbaijan was relying on the coming of these 1,500 and maybe more. And we were thinking as to what we would do. And the idea came, either the president or myself, I can't remember, that maybe I could go and talk to Hekmatyar. And it was a crazy idea, but I remember that in 1252, King Hetum of Giligia went to Karakorum, all the way to Central Asia, to talk to the Mongols, and they signed a peace treaty. I mean, just the idea that you could do it. And at that time, it took 1.5 years. His brother Simpat went before him, 1.5 years, to go and come back. Hetum went for 1.5 years and came back. And for me, it became natural because I knew history. But I also had studied Islam. So I did go to Jalalabad, met with Hekmatyar, convinced him to withdraw the mujahids. And he did. And it was my knowledge of history. How do you talk to a guy like Hekmatyar, who is the first person, when I met him after his prayer, he was the first person, when I looked at him, I said, this is an assassin. You know? This is an assassin's face, he's nothing more. And I was there alone. You know, I didn't have bodyguards or anything, and we were in the bunkers, 3 floors down under the ground to meet him. But how do you talk? How do you think like him? Okay? How do you think like him? That's what I did in my negotiations. How does the other guy think? That was my first step. What can he bring up? What argument he can bring up? And once that was done, he withdrew his mujahids. He was making money on it. Then the Azerbaijanis were discouraged. And then I worked with Baku to find the right language, and we signed a new ceasefire agreement that said this is permanent. And it lasted till 2020. So, and then once I returned, and then I ended up in academia again, I could not write the same way again. I could not lecture the same way again. The kitchen of diplomacy, of governance and decision-making raised quite a few questions on how I write history. How do I interpret history? So that it is a very dynamic relationship. Both have been part of my, let's say, journey, intellectual journey.
Question from online. Oh, no, go right ahead, sorry.
Good evening, and thank you for your book and for your talk. It was very insightful. My question is about Armenian national identity.
Armenian national identity?
Yes. So as modern-day Armenians, both mainland and diaspora Armenians, it seems like we identify with our history and historical greatness sometimes a lot more than with our independence and our statehood. And I guess our rhetoric seems like it often puts more pride into, let's say, Tigran Metz than into our very recent independence movement. So I was wondering if, first of all, if you agree, if you see that kind of dynamics, and also, if so, is it a result of, was that just like organic, natural process and just a result of human nature? Or is this mentality shaped by continuous systematic policy? And if so, what was the political agenda behind it?
Well, I will try to answer. If I do not answer because I may not have understood fully, I'll begin and then you add anything you want. Your observation is, I think, correct. But there's a big difference between those who are in the diaspora as opposed to those who are in Armenia. The diaspora problem is a different problem than the problem of Armenia. The diaspora problem is identity building. We are not where we should have been because we are diaspora. Somehow our grandfathers or whatever left, and we're not there. So we revert back to a nation because we're not a state as Armenians. And for us, it's important to build that identity, particularly in the United States, where we came as refugees and where things Armenian became national, US national, as the starving Armenians, right? When there was the first US humanitarian international aid was to Armenians and Assyrians at the time. So that is a very important thing. So when we came and started doing business and became doctors and professors and architects and whatever, and grocers and carpet sellers, all of that, we wanted to change how our neighbors saw us. And we went to history more than in other communities because there were some great things telling our neighbors, look, we had a Dikran the Great. We were big ones. And then came, we are the first Christian nation. And then came, we're victims of the genocide. So identity started building. And the fundamental problem we try to resolve here is our identity. How do we keep it collectively, individually? Armenia's problem is different, as I started saying. So there's a difference in the agenda. We're trying to, for us, the second point is that for us, Armenia is something different than for Armenians there. Armenia is an anchor. Armenia is supposed to be a paradise, right? In the 80s, some of you will remember, there was a saying that, of which we were very proud. Armenia is an open-air museum. Remember that? But think what that means. It's not people. It's for tourism. So, and the problem continues. We go to Armenia, we expect certain things. And not everyone is honest in Armenia. Not even a former president of the US is honest, but that doesn't matter, right? We expect certain things, and if there are nice hotels, nice restaurants, and service industry, we're very happy. We are tourists in Armenia. Very few of us have gone there to live there. So I would say that that is the historical greatness serves. And mind you, we remember of that history. Remember I said what history, what do we think is history? In our case, in the diaspora, we make history of elements that are good and of which we can be proud. We forget the other parts. In 1986, Tufts University Extension called me, the dean, to say, we want you to teach a course on Armenian history. And I said, why? And she said, we have a lot of ethnic students, that is Armenian heritage students, and we want them to know their history and be proud of it. I said, you're calling the wrong person. The way I teach history, you know, you're neither proud nor not proud. You just learn what happened actually, the big mistakes, the big successes, etc. So I would say, you know, we have different agendas, and identity building it's still going on. One final point. When I came to the States, it was Los Angeles, moved here in '81. But I used to come here for different programs in the summers, beginning with AYF camp in Franklin, Mass. He was the director and I was the teacher. The big question was, what is an Armenian, right? Every generation has asked that question. But that question became less relevant when Armenia became independent. Okay? My daughter stopped asking what is an Armenian. An Armenian is someone who has Armenia right there living with a flag, with a president, good, bad, but you know, whatever. And it made a big difference to the diaspora that there's an Armenia which they can go visit anytime and do whatever else they want to do. So the interaction, I think, particularly with the earthquake and then the Garapal independence and the Garapal war, kind of intruded into the diaspora agenda. And it made some organizations very unhappy because some people started sending money over there instead of over here. Okay? And attention and membership. If you have a real war and you can send something, it's different than building a new wing to the church, right?
I'm sorry, a small additional question. It seems like it is more natural for diaspora to identify with their nation like that, but also, what do you think about the way Armenians in mainland Armenia, because I am from Armenia, I've only been in the US for 4 months, and I went to school there and everything, and it seems like that emphasis on history more than sense of ownership was still present, even in school education.
In Armenia?
Yes. So I was wondering if, again, that is maybe an influence from how big our diaspora is, or is it internal policy, or is it just the way people are?
You know, for 70 years during the Soviet period, there was a way of writing and teaching history. And it was under the rubric of Marxism-Leninism, right? The socialist goals to create a communist society. And that placed nationalism in a certain context. Once the Soviet Union collapsed, a vacuum was created. And in most formerly Soviet republics, they had to find a nexus around which to build their new identity, and history became important for all of them. Because history had been distorted by the Soviets. We distorted differently. The Soviets did it differently. So the idea is that once there was no imprimatura, there was no forced ideology, the easiest way was to go to nationalism, and nationalism is based on history. And the history they teach in Armenia is horrible. It's horrible. But that is counterbalanced by the fact that there's real politics, as opposed to here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Gerard, from online is a question which I will add to, if I may. Please expand on your topic of Armenians as victims. How does Armenia become an agent of its own destiny? And my addendum is, why must it be absolutely one or the other? Of course, can't it be that Armenians are both victims and agents of their own history?
Well, that's a key question, and your addendum is right. Of course, when you're a small nation, you will always look for support, alliances, etc. But if the dominant discourse you have with the world is to complain about what has happened to you and the grievances you've had in history and today, and ask for help, and you are not taking care of yourself, okay? My interpretation would be this. After the ceasefire, for 25 years, we were told Karabakh will not be independent, and those occupied territories, the 7 districts, would have to be returned. We didn't listen. We didn't listen. We just said to the world, this is what you have to do for us. We feel more comfortable as victims. Now, we've had moments where we tried to be our own agents, to become agents of our history. But that has not been consistent. And the idea that we have to rely on someone else has been dominant. It has been dominant in our thinking. It is in the diaspora. Remember when in 1991 Armenia wanted to become independent, and the diaspora was mostly against it, saying, how can we survive as an independent country without Russia? That is because, and if you remember, maybe not, but the leader of the Tash Nation, Marukyan, made an announcement that I went to Armenia, looked at Turkey, and it's that immense country, and if we become independent, we'll be massacred the next day. And this is the most important political party in the diaspora. That is, we decided our fate from victimhood, that we were victims of genocide, we'll be again victims of genocide. Now, my point in being agent is not that you act independently, but look at the discourse now in Armenia and in the diasporan papers. Are we pro-Russian or pro-Western? And this is the wrong way to begin a discourse. Because in both cases, we are thinking as victims and needing protectors. But we need to define our own both aims, interests, as well as capabilities. As well as capabilities. This is important. For example, the Karabakh leadership and most of the diaspora was after independence of Karabakh. Although it was impossible, it was obvious it was impossible. But we went there saying Russia will do it for us, or the West will do it for us, and then we lost opportunities to get a little less, but much better than what we ended up with. So I think we have to measure the West, Russia, and try to deal with them and get whatever we can. But the nexus, the foundation of our policy cannot be that we have been and will be victims. That means we cannot go after ideals, right? We cannot go after maximalist ideals. We have to go with what we can get to make it possible for us to have stability and to grow and to see if we can create a different model of statehood. As I said, sometimes in our history we've tried that, but eventually we fall prey to let me say one thing. I've come to the conclusion that a major problem in our history for the last 1,000 years at least, but certainly the last 200-300 years, has been that a lot of our political forces have adopted programs, ideologies, and strategies that are seen as in our interest, when in fact There have been the internalization of other forces, outside forces. You know, what does it mean to be pro-Western or pro-Russian? What does it mean? It means that you are not the center of yourself to begin with, and it's at the end someone else who's going to do something for you.
Yes, please.
So first I want to say that I don't find your talk depressing at all. I do think knowing history or the facts and letting that guide you is an optimistic view and not a pessimistic one. So I look forward to reading the book.
There's one in every crowd, right? Yeah.
Hey, I have a supporter. And I didn't pay him.
We are old friends, however. The question is, what is the compromise today for us to turn the page and be the center of ourselves and not repeat the mistakes of history?
Well, that's the billion-dollar question. You know, I want to stay away from the immediate political issues. I'll try to answer, but we are going through very, very difficult and sensitive times. And I can't get into a detailed explanation as to what I think, because in some ways, what I say matters to some people. But I would say this: we have to begin with what is possible. That is one of the, and you'll see it when you read the book, the more we wait, the less leverage we have. The more we wait, thinking something will happen to save us. Nothing will happen to save us if we don't start saving ourselves. Saving ourselves means sitting and doing an inventory of what are our resources, what are the things we can get from Aliyev. What can we get today? Today we cannot get what we could get last year. Last year we couldn't get what we could have gotten 4 years ago, 5 years ago. We couldn't. Because we go by our own values, our own dreams, our own this honor and whatever. But that's not how the world functions. The more we have waited, the harder Aliyev has become. So waiting for Russia, for the US, for France, and lovely words from Macron, no action, nothing. We have to come to terms with our defeat, which is a very difficult thing to say. But if we don't do that, we will continue expecting help where there's no help coming. So the compromise will be, in general terms, what today we can get from Aliyev, and to some extent Turkey, and to do so on our own. Because today, both the US and Russia are dominating the debate, and their rivalry is dominating the debate. In September 2021, I was invited, every 10 years the State Department calls on me and asks questions, and I give my advice free. And they don't like my advice, so they don't call me for 10 years. And then they call again. And in September 2021, I went there and had a meeting with a number of people, but one meeting, State Department and Security Council people in Washington. And I told them not to get back into the region. They'll create more problems. The competition will harm Armenia. I don't know what US interests are, but my thing is that you'll complicate the issue. You see, the 2020 war and the ceasefire statement of November 9 kept out the West, right? Russia went on its own, and got the ceasefire agreement signed by Aliyev and Pashinyan, and we've had that ceasefire, which left out the West. And Washington, that is the Biden administration, that had come in January, by September still did not have a good, clear idea as to what they would do. And apparently the Security Council was saying we should go in. State Department was trying to be more careful and thinking. They were not set yet in a policy. Then they decided to go with the Security Council position. That is, we go in all the way and we act as if we are a presence there. Well, the point is that the United States levers in the region are minimal. Russia has levers that are more, that have more impact. That's one thing. The other thing is that the world order we have is chaotic, and it has a number of characteristics that make it different from what we had during the Cold War. During the Cold War, you had two, right? Superpowers, and then everything else fell in. We do not have superpowers anymore. In my view, the United States is retreating for 20 years now. I can go into this, but not today. Russia has fallen back, but the South Caucasus is more important to it than to the US. It's very simple. So that's number one. Secondly, instead of superpowers, we have regional superpowers that don't listen to any higher authority. Look at Turkey. Look at Azerbaijan now, ignoring all of the US, of the Security Council members, the world, the Pope. It doesn't matter to Aliyev. Israel does whatever it wants. India has coming up. Pakistan sometimes acts as a regional superpower. And the second point is about this world order is that different countries that have serious problems with each other also have serious cooperation projects. Azerbaijan, Iran, Azerbaijan, Russia, Russia, Turkey, Ukraine, these all have different very flexible policies. And that makes a big difference as to how we function. And whether this pro-Russian, pro-Western thing is really a real debate or a useful debate.
Gerard, several people have asked in one form or another, you said that whatever can be got from Aliyev now is more than it will be, later, and less than it would have been in the past. What impetus, what motivation does Aliyev have to give anything right now?
Maybe nothing. Maybe nothing. And he's got all the cards, right? So, Ardak Beglarian asked me, when he was here in 21, asked me, he said, what do we do now? The war is lost, etc. And my answer was, in such situations in which we are, Karabakh, Armenia, the first question is not what we can do now. The first question is what we shouldn't do now to make things worse. That's where we are. So what does he have? Well, there are some elements. There are some factors, but for that we need to change policy. We need to have more and wiser, more pragmatic diplomacy.
But what pressures exist on him, or could be brought to bear, if any?
Well, does Aliyev like the presence of Russians in Azerbaijan?
I presume not, but
Not. So, does Aliyev like all the pressure on him which harden him rather than soften him. There are some things that we can
You might
use.
say he did.
I'm sorry?
You might say that he did like it. I don't know.
Did like the pressure?
Or had welcomed the opportunity to build up to the point where this was possible. I don't know.
Well,
You tell me.
as I said, I don't want to go too much in detail, but we have to start where we have to start. That is, we have to stop this car that's rolling without a brake and every day making things worse for us. We do not have the luxury of saying, I would want this, I would want that. I think it is possible to sign an agreement with Azerbaijan. And let me propose the following. A big question between Armenia and Azerbaijan is whether Armenia has anything to say about Karabakh Armenians, right? Aliyev is saying that's my domestic internal issue, none of your business. And the international community is agreeing, more or less. Even the European Union, which has France, our great friend, or other European countries, objected to the election of a new president in Karabakh. Did you see that? They objected. They said, you don't have that right to elect your own president. You're part of Azerbaijan. You are disregarding Azerbaijani law. It's not. This is the European Union. This is the West. This is France. So if every time we set goals that are unrealistic, we tend to lose more. Aliyev had a number of options after he won the war. And we acted as if we had not lost the war. What he offered then was much better than what he's offering now. What he's offering now, I think, is manageable. It's manageable. But we have to stop this fall, it's not sustainable.
Sir.
Hi, my name is Armen Dedekian, and my question is actually news that I received today that Ruben Vartanyan, actually he made a statement saying that he would support the overthrow of Pashinyan's government. I heard that today. And also, supposedly, Moscow is sending Wagner troops to the Caucasus. I don't know where they're going to be going. So my question is, what does that mean to the Pashinyan government? And given all the angry rhetoric coming out of the Kremlin, how realistic is that to happen, the overthrow of Pashinyan's government, in your opinion? I know it's kind of not, we can't really predict, so thank you.
Yeah. It seems to me, for whatever reason, Russia has decided that they want to change Pashinyan. And what happened in Karabakh, new president, new approach, was only the first step to do it. It's a very dangerous game that Ruben Vartanyan and the Karabakh leaders are playing. Extremely dangerous. As to why Kremlin doesn't like Pashinyan, let me say that Russia can be generous when it is strong. Russia is dangerous when it is weak. Russia is vulnerable, and that is pushing them, I think, to strengthen their position in the South Caucasus. and that means Armenia. What are the chances? I don't know, and I wouldn't say if I knew. I don't want to go into speculation that can impact the situation. But I do not find Karabakh leaders, and I don't consider Rupen Vartanyan a Karabakh leader, although he tried to be. He first tried to be a leader in Armenia, correct? He came to Armenia after the war and tried to organize a coalition to bring down Pashinyan. Do you know about that? Yeah. So he couldn't make it. He doesn't have followers. He's got money. He's organizing local elections, etc. But the opposition in general has not been capable to mount an opposition in the streets. They have not been able to, for different reasons. And now they're going to do it, or they plan to do it through Karabakh. Karabakh leaders for 30 years have expected that they will set policy and Armenia will follow. That's not how it works. But they're still trying that. It's very unfortunate. And when I say why has our history gone so bad, this is one example. Why did the Pakraduni kingdom collapse? Do you know? It was established in 890. In 915, the Vaspuragan Arzunis separated and they created their own kingdom. Okay? Now, kings are kings. Kings act not out of nationalism, but out of the interest they have in the realm, in the peasants they have, the villages they own, etc. But looking at it, and then by 930 or 40, we had 3 Pakraduni kings and 2 Pakraduni princes. The whole of Armenia was divided into 5 separate and competing states. So we do things to ourselves that are harmful, and this is one of the cases where we define, Rupen Vartanyan has defined Armenia's interests in terms of Russian interests. This is, now, it may be the right policy, you know? I don't know. That's not the point at this time. But for him, obeying Moscow is in Armenia's interest. And so, the same for some other forces in Armenia. I'm not advocating to be against Russia. I find Russian civilization to be great. I've worked with the Russians when I was there, very kindly, very nicely. I appreciate their diplomacy when they've had diplomacy, which they've lost recently. They're not doing much diplomacy. But they're great diplomats, and I've learned a lot from them. But you know, I would not identify Armenia's interests with Russia's interests. For example, at the present time, Russia has insisted that this is not the time to solve the Karabakh problem, and this is not the time for Armenia-Azerbaijan treaty. It's too early. Well, I personally think that both these assessments are wrong. That if we don't have these issues resolved, we can only lose as an Armenian state and as Armenian people. So now, you know, it's open, but you have to think through these issues. Rupen Vartanyan has always insisted that Armenia, and there's a problem with Pashinyan because he's not agreeing with everything that Russia is saying. Now, maybe he should, I don't know. But these are the differences we deal with. During our time, Russia often had demands and requests. Sometimes we did it, sometimes we said no. And we didn't have any problems with that, with them. That is, we would explain and say, what is the problem you're trying to resolve? If you resolve it the way you're saying, it is harmful to us. We have no interest in harming ourselves. Now let's resolve it this other way. But the Russian attitude has changed, partly because of the problem in Ukraine, partly because there's now, Pashinyan is pursuing an active diplomacy to solve the problem with its two neighbors, Turkey and Azerbaijan. That's a problem for Moscow. And they don't like that. Now, what is the dynamics? I can't tell. How will they change government? I don't think the people will support the change. Not that they're in love with Pashinyan, but they're certainly not in love with Kocharyan or Serge Sargsyan. That's, this year I've lived, 5 months there. Last year I lived 5 months there, so, and I am a housewife when I'm there. My daughter goes to work. My grandson I take to school, bring back to school. I do the shopping and cooking, right? And so I go into the shops and talk to real people. And sometimes people will stop me in the street or in a cafe and come to talk. And most people will not want Kocharyan back because they feel that he was not only authoritarian, but impunity was his line. He could do anything to anyone. And Serge continued that. Although Serge was a softer leader than Kocharyan. But people are not going to demonstrate. Now, you can pay some people, and there are always some people who really believe that there's good reason to get rid of Pashinyan. I'm not an admirer of Pashinyan, but I look at policy. And he is looking at solving the problems with Turkey and Iran, with Turkey and Azerbaijan. If he can do that, then there's a higher degree of sovereignty. And maybe that's what Moscow doesn't like. But I'm proposing these. You can think as well as I can. It's not difficult to see what's happening.
Sure, I want to squeeze in a couple more questions before we let you off the hook and force you to sign books. From online, can you identify an example of a small country that has successfully avoided being pro-Western or pro-Russian or pro this or pro that, but been able to keep a free and open democratic society and stability?
Well, I have not made any reference to democracy. I think to bring that in, these power relations and world order issues, democracy is almost irrelevant. Neither Europe nor the US care much about democracy. They don't. Azerbaijan has been an authoritarian, if not dictatorial, country for 30 years. They have never suffered for it. And Armenia has become a democracy now for the past 4 years, and that's not, it got a few more $1 million and pats on the back, but it doesn't make any difference in terms of the interests that these countries have in the region and in Azerbaijan and in Turkey. So small countries, well, Africa is full of them. Asia is full of them. Right now, there's no pro-West, pro-Russia. There's no such thing. As I said, the power, the soft power that used to be projected is almost gone, the US soft power. It can certainly do things yet, but it doesn't have it is not in the position that it used to be 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And the refusal to recognize that brings so much distortion into American foreign policy today. But as I said, that's a different issue. You know, it's not being pro-West or pro-Russian that helps. You know, we've had revolution. Iran was pro-West, and there was a revolution, right? That's, we can look at all the pro-West. Was it Kissinger who talked about democracy, and then someone said, listen, and during the 70s, Kissinger's time, South America is full of dictators we support. And he said, yeah, they're sons of bitches, but they're our sons of bitches. So when we live out democracy, and then we realize, if my analysis is correct, that we don't have this bipolar superpower thing. Of course, China is becoming a superpower thing, but it's not as dominant as the US was when the US was a superpower, or the Soviet Union. Not that stage. It will not happen again, because it's a multipolar world, and even within that multipolarity, the secondary powers are independent, and they have very mixed policies with each other. In one place, they fight each other. In another place, they build pipelines, you know?
But you're not arguing that democracy in Armenia is against the interests of Armenia as a state?
No, no. I think democracy is great. I think democracy should be there for ourselves. That is, the country needs democracy. But it is not a foreign policy tool, as far as I'm concerned, and it's been proven that it is not, because it's not helping Armenia at all that it is democratic and Azerbaijan is not. I think at some point Pashinyan had this illusion that it will make a difference after he came to power, that Armenia is democratic. And, in this case, the example I've given is this. Democracy is good. It's like a new bride. You're a new bride for 1 day, 1 week, 1 month. And then the second month, your gesur, your mother-in-law, says, clean that floor. You're no longer a new bride. So democracy is new, we applaud, but then it doesn't matter. It didn't matter at all during the war, before the war, after the war. It didn't. And sometimes that democracy doesn't depend on the US, because sometimes the US has worked against democracy, right? This month is the 50th anniversary of the overthrow of Allende, right? We overthrew democracy in Iran in the 50s. And we're still very active. What matters to the US is if it can use democracy as a selling point, fine. If it doesn't, we forget about it. We forget about it. I can go on democracy, although I'm at heart a Democrat, but yeah.
Let's try to wrap this up so we can sign some books, huh?
Please.
Okay. So I was just reading.
Don't be upset.
I'm not upset.
He's a busy
Yes,
guy.
I
just.
So I just read the latest rumor, which is Ruben Vardanyan is on a train heading out to meet with Kim Jong-il.
Yes, and
do you object unfortunately, to that? They blew up the train. But, these are rumors. These are not truth.
Yeah.
But going back to reality, it happened to be 5 years ago that there was a movement, and they were walking around Karabakh. And we had the luxury of having a panel discussion across the street, as it turned out.
This is in Yerevan?
No.
Karabakh, which Karabakh?
The people who were walking were in Karabakh.
Which Karabakh?
Kanyatka. Anshusht Yerevan.
Yerevan, ha.
But we had a panel discussion across the street in the United States. You happened to be on the panel. I happened to be the moderator. A few of us participated.
Is this a rumor or true?
Part of it's true. So
We'll sort it
anyway,
out,
getting
I'm sure.
to my point.
Yeah.
Okay. You were one of the speakers, and I was just reading in the Mere Spectator what you said, just in case you've forgotten. And you could not have predicted that Pashinyan would have succeeded to overthrow Serge, right?
Right,
If I'm not mistaken.
right.
Now, I don't know what you would have expected to have happen, because you didn't say, but you didn't predict success of that movement.
Right.
And in fact, with all the discussion going on, we had a reporter on the street telling us what was happening, all that discussion, I don't know anyone who could have really expected Serge to yield and allow an outsider to take over the government and become what is Pashinyan today, a weak, self-absorbed, incapable president. After having passed a constitution, after having changed the nature of government, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think anyone really predicted that, but here we are, okay? So the question is, could something as unpredictable as that take place now, whatever form it might be, where somebody that no one knows, somebody who's walking from Gyumri to Yerevan and walking around and capturing the attention of people and causing us to say, nah, it'll never happen. Who would that be? And what would happen?
Well,
You looking for names?
Look,
No,
he's an out-of-the-box thinker, but he's created a box around himself, so he stops thinking out of the box. So
you know,
what would-
I've learned my lesson.
I know you have.
One, I've learned I couldn't predict then, and I don't predict now. I said I don't know. So scenario you have, it's possible, but I don't know. No, I don't know what could happen. You could create so much chaos, and then, you know, you don't need 1 million people to change government,
No,
right?
you don't.
So it's possible.
In fact, I think all you need is 12
12 people?
apostles, right?
Well, when you go with 12, there's a problem. Look at what happened to the teachings of Christ when it started with 12. Where has it gone? What crimes are being committed in the name of Christ?
Ador Masimi di Khosisima.
Ayo, Vorovedev, any revolution that is with 12 people is not good.
So now you're condemning Christ?
No, I'm condemning the
Well,
followers.
maybe this is a good place to stop.
No, I'm saying that the followers have done so much damage and crimes in the name of Christ.
So who's going to give the closing prayer tonight? Well, I won't say on that happy note. So on that note, and to the people online, and we have a lot of people watching online, thank you very much for hanging in. Thank you for all the questions, many of which I was not able to get to, but which I will relay to Professor Libaridian. And thanks for everybody who was here in person tonight and for asking probing questions. Indeed, the books are on sale. Indeed, Professor Libaridian will sign them for you, and please thank him. And again, if you have questions or comments, feedback about the event, email it to us, and we would be interested to hear it. But keep it clean. Thank you.